Stardate 2901.0. All right, so I should say first that I've completed the CDT at this point, um, and I'm going back through my notes, trying to kind of reconstruct my path, and I wrote down some interesting stories that might be fun to tell. Um, so yeah, so I'm going back in time a bit, maybe almost a month to when I was in Grants, um, which is sort of in the center of New Mexico. Um, it was a kind of a sprawling town that I didn't love. I got stuck at a little hotel, a sure stay hotel, on the edge of town across from a Dairy Queen for a couple days. While I was recovering, my knee was not in good shape. That was when all the Charlie Kirk stuff was happening, so that was on the TVs everywhere. It was kind of dominating, like the psychic space, for that period of time. So right. So I eventually figured out how to get out of Grants, and I decided to take the blue line going south. There was two, different directions that we could go. The red line, which was mostly a highway, and which my friend Timber said, she didn't really enjoy back when she hiked the trail. So I decided to take the blue line. I thought, oh, this is great. It'll be actually in the woods. It was a fair bit longer, maybe 10, 15 miles longer, but I thought it would just be much more enjoyable. So I headed out of Grants, and for the first, like, I don't know, almost 5 miles, it was a very narrow paved road, and on each side of the road there were dog owners. It was just like dog owners heaven. And every single yard had some like guard dog with a chain link fence or a wooden fence, just like absolutely exploding at me as I was walking by. So that was like dog alley. I really didn't know when it was going to end, but I was glad that at least for probably I don't know, it must have been at least 30 or 40 houses that had dogs. None of them got out of their yards. They all, they all stayed in their yards. No dogs actually got out and chased me down the road. That's like probably the number one annoying thing with animals when you're hiking. Um, so it was a little disappointing because it turned out to be a paved road for quite a while. It was, like a pretty country road. There weren't many cars on it. But I was expecting to be in the woods and I wasn't for almost a full day. So, found some good water sources along the road there, wells that were dumping water into livestock tanks. Um, One, it was kind of cool. It was like um, it was the first electric well that I'd come across where the ranchers actually gave you instructions on how to turn on the well. So if you wanted fresh water out of like the pipe, you could go over to the telephone pole, open the circuit breaker box, and then flip on the breaker, and you'd get water pumping out into the livestock tank, and you'd go over and get water from the pipe instead of having to get stale water. So that was kind of cool to discover the first one of those. Eventually, I did make it onto a dirt road, but it was still a dirt road. It wasn't a trail. So that entire section, the blue trail, blue line, I guess we call it red line or blue line, the entire blue line south of Grants, which took me more than a day to do, was just a road, and there was really so many roads in the CDT in New Mexico. New Mexico is beautiful, but yeah, the number of roads was surprising in the end. So anyway, I got onto that dirt road. It had more sort of unique and interesting wells. I came across um, a windmill well, and it was a really windy day. So the windmill, when it spins, it sort of powers this piston that moves up and down, and you can actually see it going into the ground and back up and pumping the water up and into the livestock tank, which was overflowing all over the place. So that was actually a situation where a lot of water was kind of being wasted. Um, yeah, wasted, which was a bummer, but nice clean water source. There was another one that was a solar well. So I guess the sun charges up a battery, and similar to the first well I was talking about, you can then just flip a breaker on a telephone pole to power the well, and after maybe 20 or so seconds, water just came up through a pipe. So I was worried about the water sources on the blue line because usually on alts there's less comments or there's less waypoints to post comments on, but there was a ton of water, and that proved to be true for almost all of New Mexico, which was really lucky. Okay, so I spent the night along that dirt road in sort of a windy spot, and the next day I hit a 7 mile section of what was called I'm not pronouncing this right, but Bonita Zuni, and it was also called the El Malpais, Malpais, which is a Spanish word. So when the Spanish explorers were first discovering that part of the country, they named it that, which literally means bad country. And they would take their pack animals, their mules and horses around it because they would just, really damage the feet of these animals, or they would fall over. So it's like a very sharp volcanic rock. Um, a lot of like little tiny stuff, but also large stuff, and it was just absolutely hell to walk on. It was horrible. There were 7 miles of it before I got back to the red line. Um, but the red line actually continues south another 35 miles in that bad country. So if you were a purist on this trail, you would just be in for, 2, possibly 3 or 4 days of absolute hell, like very, very slow, torturous hiking, tearing up your shoes, rolling your ankles, really hard on your knees. I had some knee problems. I didn't meet a single hiker who went that way. I found some old comments on that route, who were basically, lamenting that they went in there and telling everyone to stay out. So that's really just a horrible section and shouldn't, in my opinion, be part of the trail. It's like just miserable and dangerous and sort of pointless to um yeah, I don't know, like make our lives so miserable. Let's not go into the bad country. Let's not go into Malpay in the future would be my vote. Um, the cool things that were in there was a lot of caves that had been formed out of the volcanic soil. You could actually sleep in them. There's one that was full of bats. Um, there's some vertical caves, which are basically just holes in the ground. You can like accidentally fall into and die in. And then there was breaks in the earth that kind of reminded me of one of the Superman movies where there's an earthquake and the earth opens up and there's just this, gaping hole in the ground, this crack, and you can look down in them, and they'll go down, 15, 20, 30 feet. There's some sections where you really can't figure out where the trail is at all. There's no indication of where the trail is. You're just going off GPS, and you'll get in a spot where you're surrounded on all sides by these like, really deep cracks that are too large to jump over. So you have to kind of backtrack and weed your way through it, like some sort of weird maze where the walls of the maze aren't actually visible. They're not like in front of you, but they're on the ground, and you don't know, if you're going to hit a wall until you actually get there and look down and realize you can't jump over, this like crack in the ground. And so you have to go back in the maze that you're in. So just miserable, absolutely miserable, miserable. After that, there was a small section of brown line. Um, it actually was a ways, it was about 10 miles on a paved road. Um, and I hit my first water cache, which I was so grateful for. The note that was left on the water cache, like on our guide, was from someone called Jen is Trouble. And she actually showed up and offered me a ride. We talked for a while. She seemed like really cool. So it was just awesome to meet one of the trail angels, local trail angels, who was making sure that we all had water on those really long road walks that everyone takes to get around this volcanic section. So that day, it was really rainy and there was ominous storms, and it was also a huge open, like valley, grassy valley, um, and fences along the highway. So I would have been in bad shape if like some storm rolled in and started pummeling me because being so open, the wind would have been really bad, and there was nowhere to throw down except like right next to the road. Luckily, when the rain did finally come, I'd made it to the end of the paved section, and I was on a little dirt road with some juniper trees on the side. So I found a little juniper tree grove and set up my tent while the storm came in and like hailed all over me. And it was actually kind of nice. Got a little nap, put my earplugs in, got a little nap. Um, so yeah, got going. And then a little bit later, kind of into a valley. A little bit later, while I was setting up my tent after poking around for a little while, I actually saw a UFO. That's my story. And I have a video of it that maybe I'll post at some point. But I kind of looked up into the sky, and at first I thought it was the moon because it was as bright as the moon. But it was in a rectangular shape, and there's no way that any like crescent of the moon would ever look like this sort of rectangular shape. And I noticed also after looking at it for a little while that there were some clouds behind it, so it was low enough in the sky where there were clouds behind it, and but it was just like hanging up there in the sky, wasn't moving at all, totally quiet, and didn't seem, I don't know, just seemed kind of like a normal part of nature, even though there's no such thing as a square moon. So finished setting up my tent, looked back up in the sky 10 or 15 minutes later, and it was gone. So I sent that video that I took to my dad, who's an enthusiast, UFO enthusiast, and he called it a chiclet and says that this is something that people often see. So if you're going to see a UFO, New Mexico is a good place to do it. And so I now have my one UFO sighting under my belt. Got my tent set up and just got absolutely obliterated by a lightning storm, lightning strikes all around me, and more hail, and the rain just came down thunderously. I was running out of water a little bit, so I was thinking to myself I should try to figure out how to collect the rainwater and put out a pot, and tried to put my umbrella out for a little while upside down to try to capture some rain. And at one point, could hear one of the washes building up into a stream, and got out of my tent, went over to see like the muddy stream, but none of my efforts resulted in any water. So it turns out that it's actually pretty hard to gather clean water when it's raining like that because there's so much dirt being passed around, and yeah, it's just it's so miserable. Anyway, it's probably possible. I just wasn't good at it. So anyway, went to sleep that night, and yeah, had a beautiful morning the next morning. Walked past an old abandoned log cabin and down into a canyon. And that was one of the first like real desert canyons that I was getting into, one of many. Um, and kind of what these canyons are like. I don't know, they can be really high on either side, up like 1,000 feet. Many of them are only, 20 or 30 feet high. And then along the bottom is like all sand. And the reason it's all sand is because they turn into rivers when it really rains hard. And the rivers carry all the dirt down onto the bottom and just leave it as sand. So it's kind of like walking in on a beach almost in the bottom of a little canyon in the desert. So that was cool. That area of New Mexico also, there's all of these artifacts from First Peoples. So you can kind of go on these side quests off the trail to see little caves, cave drawings, or um, very ancient buildings that have just been worn down by the wind and rain over the years. That almost looks like natural formations, but you can tell that they were once, yeah, like homes of some kind. So really cool. Nothing labeled at all, no official roads out to them, but Yeah, definitely, ancient, interesting artifacts in that section. So eventually, I got dumped out onto a dirt road that was a straight shot to Pie Town. So that was a long, a long, dusty road. Um, about halfway, there was this awesome little ranch that had a chair and table and water and apples, and asked for donations right along the road. So it was really nice. I was running low on water there, and finally, eventually got to Pie Town, which is an awesome little town. It's kind of like um, here's the way I would describe it. Someone told me that it was cheap to buy land there, but you couldn't build anything because you couldn't get any supplies, materials, or workers there to build anything. So people have done their best to repurpose and recycle the things that have been built there. So it's kind of like just this hodgepodge mix of like crazy stuff all stuck together. Almost reminds me of like Waterworld or some dystopian future where everybody's just kind of like bolting everything. Lots of parts of automobiles and trailers had been attached to houses to make things work. And the restaurant, which was called the Gathering Place 2, was a lot like that. Had sort of a central building, and then, all of these like metal shed roofs had been tacked onto it um, for like awnings, and picnic tables were underneath them. And the food was absolutely amazing. People were super nice. I had sent a resupply box there. So, I was overjoyed that it was actually there. Got that. The one thing that was a bummer is that they told me when I got there that I'd missed Pie Festival by 1 day, and it only happened once a year. So the bad luck of that was just like absolutely heartbreaking because, you're hiking, like pie is like the thing that you want the most besides water um, as a hiker, and you can eat a lot of pie. Um, Even my mom knew about Pie Festival. I give my parents a call when I get to town, and my mom was like, "Oh, are you there for Pie Festival?" So somehow I, as the hiker going to Pie Festival, talking to people, no one told me, but my mom, who lives on the other side of the country, knew about Pie Festival in Pie Town. So I was out of the loop, and it was a little bit sad. I did get some later in the day, but. Yeah, if I had known, I certainly would have hiked a bit faster, or I wouldn't have stayed an extra day in Grants, so I could have been there for Pie Fest. Um, but yeah, so the cool thing about it, that place in Pie Town, was they had a hostel that I'd really call kind of the heart of the entire trail, the entire CDT. There's hostels like this on every trail on the Appalachian Trail. There's a place called, oh man, what was it called? Yeah, I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. But it was this woman who had inherited a farm from her grandmother, and her grandmother had looked after hikers, and they would do like massages, and they cooked dinner for everybody every night. And people would just kind of like get stuck there in a vortex and never want to leave and help build out buildings on the property. So this place was sort of like that. The woman who had run it for many years had actually died about 10 years before, um, and had donated the house to essentially, the CDT or anyone who was passing through. So it was a hostel that was managed by no one and just had some basic rules that hikers were meant to follow to clean up after themselves, um, and stuff like that. So it was sort of like a terrarium, it's like as long as there's enough hikers and bikers stopping by and reading the rules, discovering the place, keeping the place going, um, that it was just going to keep going. There was like the fridge was stocked, the stove still worked. The original family who grew up there, like the woman I said had kind of looked after the hikers, she had at least a daughter and a son, and they actually stopped by when I was there. They don't often stop by, but I was kind of lucky to meet them, and they were telling me all about like their memories growing up with hikers in the house and stuff like that. And they did look after a little bit, um, and just make sure that the taxes got paid. So it's just a absolutely wonderful place. All of the hikers hiking north, it's about the 500-mile mark, maybe 450-mile mark, and your shoes are shot about that point. So there's all these hiker shoes that they've just um, like hung on the side of their house, like hundreds of hiker shoes, and the whole place was just covered in maps of the CDT. Really cool little bunk beds upstairs. I made a video of it that maybe I'll post as well, but just had the best vibe ever. It's called the Toaster House because there's all kinds of toasters hanging off of the fence in front, like hundreds of, maybe not hundreds, but dozens of toasters. Um, yeah, really, really cool spot. The other thing about Pie Town is it's a dark town, which means they're not allowed to have any lights shining up at night for astronomers, or I guess UFO watchers. And that was really cool at night, going out back at night to find the privy and seeing all the stars in the sky in the middle of a town. Um, is unique. It's like I'm used to that, seeing that like out in the middle of the desert or the forest, but to get, you know, that many bright, beautiful stars in the Milky Way right in the center of a town is pretty awesome. So I would say that Pi Town, if there's a center of the universe, Pi Town is nominated in my mind as the center of the universe. A wonderful place if you're ever in that area. Really quirky and unique place. Okay, let's see what else here. Toaster House. Okay. Um, Two of the people that I met there were really, really cool. One was a biker, or bike packer who, his line was that he didn't live anywhere and he had everything, all of his possessions with him. He had nice bike set up. He actually had quite a lot of bags and stuff on his bike, so he wasn't like a ultralight bike packer. Um, he had what looked like a big tent in what he had to live comfortably. He had everything he needed to live comfortably, and he'd been all over South America and Europe and in Asia and had some cool stories. So just good to be reminded that there are people like that out there who, for decades, this guy's had been going for 20 years. He was in his 60s, just yeah, just live on earth and keep moving almost every week, and are having a blast doing it, and it just seemed like a really, really vibrant, healthy way to live his life. The other biker was a younger guy, probably in his 20s, just out for the month. But yeah, just really like great vibe that night, hanging out with those guys and someone else who was helping out with he post pie festival feast that they have at the hostel every year. All right, so yeah, Dark Town I talked about. Blue Line. Okay, so south of Pie Town. So south of Pie Town, again, I had to make a choice between the blue line and the red line. And I chose the blue line because there was this place called Davila Ranch that looked like a nice place to recharge my phone and get water and stuff if I needed to. But that was definitely a mistake. After reading the comments later, um, you have to choose many, many different times on the CDT which path you want to take. Do you want to take the red line, the blue line, the brown line? You have to, and for the most part, I've been really happy with my decisions, but in this case, I wish I had taken the red line. It sounded like just a really nice, relaxed, chill walk in the woods, and the blue line turned out to be a pretty boring road walk again. Um, the Davila Ranch, it was fine. I got water there and kind of like hung out on their couch for a little while, but there was really nothing special about it. There was nobody there to meet. um, I did have another, what I thought at the time was another UFO encounter. This was an auditory one. Basically, I just heard what sounded like a 16-wheeler in the distance in front of me somewhere, and I was like, "Oh, there's a highway." And it just got louder and louder and louder until it sounded like it was coming right at me, like really fast. And like the sound actually did come right at me. And right when it was about to get to me, it sounded like it went over my head. And the trees all around me were like, blowing all around. And it was actually kind of terrifying. Um, and then it sort of faded, but I didn't see a thing. Clear sky, a few clouds, didn't see anything, just this loud sound that, yeah, like started in the distance and then just, I guess, strafed me. So, later, I mentioned that one to my dad. I got a video of that one too. And he was just like, oh no, that's definitely not a UFO. UFOs are silent. And sent it to my family members. And my mom was like, no, it's just an airplane. Must have been, close by, right over the hill. You just didn't see it or something. So anyway, I can see how once you see one or two weird things in the sky out in New Mexico, anything that happens to you, you can just be like, oh, it's a UFO. And there are US air bases out there, and they're testing all kinds of weird airplanes. So totally possible that one was just an airplane. Um, all right, so yeah, so did that red line section, and I got to Highway 12, and decided to go into reserve, but I needed a ride. Unlike most of the other towns in New Mexico, which you walk right through, this one was a good 30 to 40 miles west, off trail. I didn't have service. Luckily, I had my InReach satellite device, so I could text someone in the town and ask for a ride, for like 30, $40. And I got down into reserve. Is absolutely beautiful drive down there. Mountains all around it. This young firefighter picked me up in like a old Corvette or something, like old beat up Corvette with like heavy metal skulls all over the dashboard. And he was like, yeah, I stole my roommate's car. Like, hopefully he's okay with it. Um, anyway, he was telling me all about the fires that they've been putting out recently. Most of them were car fires, vehicle fires of some kind. Um, and yeah, it sounded like they had a lot of fires and not a lot of firemen, and most of the firemen were older. He was a younger guy, so they were trying to get him to stay, and kind of, be like the new generation. Um, but yeah, so Reserve itself was kind of a small town, a little bit of a bummer. There were only two restaurants. They were okay. Um, but it was a good place to rest for a while. My knee was still messing with me, so it was good every time I passed a town to take a zero and just let my knee heal and my ankle heal. One of the waitresses in the local restaurant, we were chatting for a bit just because both times I went in, there was nobody else except me. Like I was the only person to go to these restaurants for the entire day. And she was like, yeah, it's kind of unpredictable. Sometimes when the hunters all empty out, they'll fill up, for a few days. Or when the hot shots come in fighting fires, they'll all like, slam the restaurants really hard for a week or two or something. And then it'll just be completely quiet. The guy that I got a ride back um, to the trail with, said something about that area. He was basically like people who couldn't afford to retire in LA, places like LA, who'd lived there their whole lives, um, take their Social Security money and retire to places like Reserve that are much, much cheaper to live, but there's no jobs out there. So basically, I think that's what those towns are. Like, there's just no businesses, no jobs, but there's a bunch of people living out there who have fixed income, who are kind of just, in like a peaceful, beautiful place, but really don't have access to healthcare services or all kinds of other things. So yeah, it's kind of funny little beautiful valley town, a little beat up, but really nice people in there. Um, okay, so let's see. Yeah, so south of Highway 12, when I got back to Highway 12, um, it finally was a nice sort of forest hiking again. It was beautiful, a little bit tricky finding water. There was one spot I got lost walking all over a hill looking for a cabin that was supposed to have a cistern behind it, and I just hadn't read really closely the instructions that one of the other hikers had left, and I was on the wrong side of the road. Anyway, I finally found it, and there was this huge metal plate sort of covering the cistern, and that I had to drag off. It was like it took all my strength to drag this metal plate off the cistern, and underneath that, it was like the water had gone so far down, the water level had gone so far down, it was just almost like a cave, like a big opening in the earth. So I had to climb down into it to the very bottom to find just a little bit of water that was still running through the bottom of that thing. But it was good water. And then, yeah, just kept heading south through more beautiful woodland, which is totally a surprise in New Mexico. But at least half my time in New Mexico, I was hiking in the woods, not the desert. Um, and so that woodland section eventually emptied out into these vast grass desert fields, totally beautiful, especially at sunset. And I found like a livestock pond towards the end of the day, pretty late, maybe like almost around like 7 o'clock as the sun was going down. And you're really not supposed to camp next to those things in case a ton of livestock, come in and then you maybe trample your tent or whatever. So um, I went on a little bit further, got into a pretty large grassy canyon, narrow canyon that had steep, yeah, steep sides on either side, and it really felt a little bit dodgy in there. Like when the sun is going down, it feels like something's hunting you from the sides of the canyon, like mountain lions or something. So I didn't find any place for, I didn't find any place. So it just basically got completely pitch black. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to hike anymore. And I just threw my tent down towards the side of the canyon, and it turned out to be fine that night. Now, the next day, I got really excited. That was the section I'd been waiting for in all of New Mexico. The section north of Ghost Ranch was unexpectedly fantastic, totally beautiful and unique and strange and beautiful. But what I knew was supposed to be really good was the Gila River, which is the section I was getting into, and it's spelled Gila, but sounds like Gila with an H. Um, so yeah, so I got down near the top of that, but I had noticed about a week before that there was a warning posted on the guide right at the beginning of the Gila about a lot of destruction in the river due to a flood. So that means that um, like lots of trees had been downed in the river, and it might be really difficult or impossible to hike through that section. And with my knee injury, and the ankles the way they are, I was like, all right, maybe it's smart to figure out how to get around this somehow. But at the same time, I didn't want to miss what was supposed to be the most beautiful section. So I got some information from people, answering my questions on Facebook about what I should do, and they were basically like, "Yeah, this section is horrible, and don't walk it and stuff." So I decided to take the high road. I guess after the destruction a few years ago, people kind of staked out a high road that went along the top of the canyon, so you can look down into the Gila. So I was gonna skip the first in the that road that goes along the top of the section, cross the Gila 5 times. So I basically had 5 chances to drop down back into the river after where, I thought the destruction might have been cleared out. So yeah, so got up, see what I've written here. Right. I took the high road. So, right. So my plan was to take the high road for the first 2 or maybe 3 sections, and then drop into the Gila for the last 2 sections because those sounded like they were the best sections anyways. Um, so yeah, I got up on the high section, and it was just totally beautiful hiking, like really, really cool to look down into the river valley. And also just the forest up there was beautiful, and it was challenging, high elevation hiking, and it was just a lot of fun. So walked through some sort of horse carnival too. That was kind of cool. Um, Down into another beautiful valley. Yeah, and the high road. high road after I crossed the Gila the first time was absolutely gorgeous. Um, okay, so when I was in there, I met an old hunter named Fred. I came across another group of people on horseback. A lot of people were in there on horses because it was bow hunting season. And so, the hunters go in there, and if they take a very large animal like an elk or a bear or something, they have no way to get it out without pack animals. So that's why a lot of the hunters were, had their horses in there. But there was this one guy who was just kind of hanging out at a camp that he'd sent up with a big tent, and he was very talkative. He wanted to, so I sat down with him for a while. His name was Fred, and he's an old retired doctor, probably in his 70s, out there with his son, and he had a house close by, and he knew all about the rivers and where the destruction was and wasn't, and how I guess there's a team that comes in also with pack animals to drag out a lot of the downed trees from that section of the Gila, and they'd been doing good work over the years, but hadn't gotten through the first three sections. That's what he told me. Later, I've come to believe that I think the third section was actually probably clear, and I could have done that section, but that's okay. Um, so right. So after that, kept going, um, and ended up at the end of the day at this little cute little cabin. It was locked, but it had a nice front porch. That you'd get out of the rain underneath. And there were some weekend warriors there and a hunter. So I talked to those guys for a while and decided to find a better place to camp. Walked away and then was like, you know what? That place is cool. So I went back there anyway. I wasn't gonna stay there because of all these comments about it being haunted. And don't believe in that stuff, but I just didn't, it was like kind of like the vibe of it was a little bit weird. But I decided that it was probably the best place to stay, and it was getting late in the day. So in any case, one of the hunters had had the same idea as me, and he'd gone back there too to just kind of hang out and eat some food. Um, and yeah, he turned out to be just like a really nice guy. So I had dinner, talked to him for a long time. We were just talking about all kinds of stuff. And he had a buddy who had posted up near a water source, who, while we were talking, texted him. They had satellite text on their iPhones. I was really jealous about that. And was like, hey, I just took an elk. And they'd been out there 10 days without getting anything. So that was a really exciting moment. Um, so we kind of waited for his buddy to show up on a horse, and they went off together to basically spend the entire night, kind of cutting up the elk and getting it down into the Gila, into the valley, or into the canyon, so it wouldn't heat up during the day the next day. I think their plan was to try to put it in a bag and put it in the river to keep it cold, but then also during the day use the walls of the canyon to keep themselves in shade so they wouldn't heat up, and they could get their catch out without getting bacteria in it. So yeah, always interesting to talk to hunters. It's not something I've done in my life, or I haven't, we don't have family members or close friends who do that. So it's just a totally different way of living. And yeah, always interesting to hear about how much money they save by um, putting a lot of meat in a freezer, and figuring out how much money it takes to buy all the equipment and spend time doing this, and yeah, all that stuff. So all right, let me see what have I written here. Oh yeah, and the stars were like super cool when they came out that night. And he pointed out a line of satellites that was Starlink. I didn't realize Starlink actually traveled in a line like that. And yeah, so we talked about like satellite internet and what they have. So I'm gonna take some of that information up with me to New Hampshire, to my place, to see if I can get free Starlink internet now. All right, so right. The only other thing I'd say is when his friend showed up, he was like in such an adrenaline high from having taken that elk that I think he was driving his horse a bit nuts. The horse was kind of like was like, "Calm down, dude." And they almost ran right over my tent. Um, so anyway, they told me some stories about another hunter who took a bear right along the side of the trail there that had been problematic. Um, and so that was interesting because there were some comments in my guide about a bear harassing people. Um, anyway, okay, so next day. So the day after that, I was like all excited to go down into the Gila, actually, see the river properly. And on my way down there, I ran into another section hiker in her 60s, and she was having an absolute blast. We had a great talk, but she hadn't done any of the river. She'd only done the high route the whole way, and she'd also just walked the road all the way from Silver City. So it was like she was. It was almost like she was avoiding. She was hiking the CDT, but she was religiously avoiding actually ever stepping foot on it at the same time. She was just walking around it every chance she could. Um, but it was just awesome to run into another hiker. Again, I hadn't run into many. I ran into more later, but yeah, but that put me behind schedule a little bit. And when I did get to, the trail that led me down into the Gila, I probably went a little bit too quick on the way down and banged up my knees again. I did have my braces on, but I think I was just too excited to get down there. But but holy cow, once I was down there, that was some of the best hiking of maybe the best hiking of the entire trail. It was so beautiful. Absolutely so beautiful. I was in a constant state of awe, trying to take photos of it, but none of my photos came close to how beautiful it was there. The way that I would describe it is just it's like so verdant and full of life because of all the water down there. And in a desert setting, it's just really cool and unique to see like all those desert plants, um, thriving like that. But then on all sides, the canyon walls just went straight up, and these very bizarre patterns that kind of ended in spires, like really steep little spires. And further down, there's this section called the cave dwellings, where I guess people, just like carved caves into the cliffs and lived there. And I can see why. I never wanted to leave this place. It was absolutely beautiful. Um, and I kind of assumed it would just be like that for the next few days because I was going to be in the Gila for the next few days. But spoiler, it wasn't. It really was just a fairly short section above the visitor center in what was called Little Bear and Big Bear. So there's like two canyons. Little Bear and Big Bear. And I wished after, I realized that it was just those two that I had dropped in at least one section earlier, because when I looked upstream, I didn't see any destruction up there. So yeah, maybe someday I'll actually even go back there and hike upstream until, I can't anymore, and then just go back because it was just is impossible to describe how gorgeous it was there. And it's so fun to do all those river crossings. So you're constantly, sort of like following a very well marked trail through, and it's been cut perfectly, like someone's maintaining it really well, but you're crossing fairly shallow, sandy river bottom. The river is like maybe a foot to 3 feet over and over, so your feet are wet all day, but it keeps you nice and cool. It's just beautiful. Um, Okay, so there was also hot springs along the way, so you could stop and jump in hot springs that were like really deep and that sort of like aquamarine blue, totally beautiful. There's another hot springs. That one was called Jordan Hot Springs, the first one. And there's another one right along the Gila River itself that dumped out hot water into the river, and people had built sort of these like rocks around to capture the hot stuff, so you could get in where it was the hottest, and it was actually too hot where it came out, so you could kind of choose how hot you wanted um, to go for a bath, just how far away from the source you wanted to get. So in any case, I camped out down there near one of the hot springs, had a nice dinner, and had a migraine while I was sleeping that night. Um, woke up in the morning, took in a leave, and by about midday, I was fine. So remember that for a story I'll tell in the future. You know, I thought, kind of based on this experience, that a migraine at night wouldn't be that big a deal. Like, yeah, maybe I'd have a headache for half a day, but I'd be fine. I had no real aphasia problems, no real vision problems. If you don't know this about me, I get what are called hemiplegic migraines, and first I have this vision problem where I can sort of only see half the field. I can only see the left side of things and not the right side. And then that becomes expressive aphasia, so I can't speak clearly. And then I can't move my hands in the way that I want to move them. So, for example, if I want to dial a phone number, I won't be able to do that. Or if I'm trying to stuff my sleeping bag into its sleeping sack, I can't do it because my hands don't work. Um, if I don't have medicine in time. But um, I was kind of okay. So um, yeah, so got to the visitor center, um, and that's where another little roadblock started. I was trying to get to a place called DCP, which was, I think it was Doc Campbell's Trading Post. And on that roadwalk, I ran for the first time into Javelinas, and that's spelled with a J, so it's Javelinas, and they kind of look like little pigs, but they're not pigs, and someone was telling me they're actually a closer relative to rhinoceroses, which sort of makes sense. Like the way that they move is really funny, like the way their legs move, and they kind of move in family packs, and they can be dangerous, but what's also weird about them or unique about them is they can't see well or hear well. So if they charge you, all you're supposed to do is, right before they hit you, just sort of step to the side, maybe 10 or 20 feet out, and they won't be able to see or hear that you've moved, and they'll just go right right past you. Um, but yeah, they're really cool, and there's a ton of them down there. So that was the first time I'd seen the javelinas. Um, and let's see. So yeah, then I made it to DCP, um, and it was closed. I made it there about an hour and a half early, waited a couple hours for it to open, but it didn't open. And I needed it to because my resupply box was there. I did see like a shopkeep inside, so I knocked on the window and she came out and told me that unfortunately the owner had had a stroke the night before and they couldn't open unless I needed something. So I told her about my resupply box, and she was very gracious and let me come in, and we found the resupply box. So that was super lucky that happened. And she also let me buy some ice cream, which they made there. It was really, really good ice cream and burritos and pizza and a bunch of other stuff. So I sort of hung out on the picnic table in the parking lot, letting anyone know who'd come by, wanted to get in, that what had happened and why the place was closed. Um, there was also a trail angel who stopped by in a van. Her name was Tangle's No Spare, because I guess she had a bunch of hikers in her van once when they got um, a flat and she didn't have a spare tire, so that was her trail name. They named her No Spare. Um, and yes, she gave me some information about the trail south of where we were. And it was also a really weird coincidence. She had just been up in New Hampshire hiking on a trail in Franconia Notch that I'd done trail work on a couple months earlier, 2 or 3 months earlier, and had fallen and chipped her tooth on a rock, and she had a big gap in her front tooth, that happened to be from falling on a trail that I had done trail maintenance. I felt slightly responsible for maybe not doing a good job on that trail. um, but in any case, yeah, so kind of wrapped up there. My headache was going away. Walked down a little bit more road and under a bridge to reconnect with the Gila River. So I had another section of the Gila River, which I was super excited about, which was maybe 2 or 3 times as long as the section I'd already done. So I was totally ready to go in there and just have a great time. And it was not a great time. What had been a beautiful hiking experience north of the visitor center just was absolute hell. And it just wasn't like nice anymore. The canyon wasn't as impressive. It sort of got, like not as high on either side. The trail was impossible to find. There was um, weeds everywhere and thorns, and I was walking down the river half the time. It was really slippery rocks, so I'd fall over. A little boat of some kind would have been great. If I had a little floaty or like inner tube or something, I totally would have just got on that and just floated down the river. So eventually, at the end of all that, I think I did get to the end of it by the end of the day. Oh no, I camped there. I camped in the middle there. So it took me 2 days to get through that. Oh, it was awful. Um, yeah, so the end of all that, I finally got to a spot where I knew the trail was going back up into the mountains. So I cleaned off all the blood and thorns and, uh, you know, all the stuff that had gotten into my pack and headed up into the mountains. And that was so wonderful to be back up in the mountains. It was a beautiful, challenging hike. Went over a real mountain pass, um, which was cool because on the south side of the pass, it switched over to desert. On the north side, it was all forest. And it's just really cool whenever there's, such a defined line between two very different environments. And I had cell service for the first time in days on the south side also. So I was able to download a bunch of podcasts and, send emails out and stuff. So that was cool. Um, so, I went down the pass on the south side. It was getting kind of dark. I was a little bit worried because I was having a hard time finding a place to camp. And because it was desert on that side, there weren't many water sources. So I kind of picked up the pace, aiming for this one water source I was just hoping I could camp near, and got super lucky because um, it turned out to actually be a campground, like with a real places to camp. I wish I hadn't rushed that section though, because it was so pretty. It was one of these sort of like boulder fields where there's round, flat boulders all stacked up on top of each other, almost like furniture or like some little kid's toy. Um, and there was a nice little spring which was the water source where I camped. I got to have lunch, sitting on these sort of like boulder furniture stuff, looking down into the valley as the sun went down. It was just totally, totally beautiful. And yeah, I wish I had taken more pictures and gone more slowly through there. Um, but I was just happy that it worked out so well. So anyway, the next day I knew I would make it down into Silver Springs. So I got up a little bit late and had a really nice, beautiful forest walk down to the road. There's about a 10-mile paved road into Silver Springs that I was going to have to walk. Um, at the beginning of the road, right after a really nice pavilion, I ran into the owner of Hike and Bike, who gave me the skinny on which was the correct hotel to go to. He told me to go to the Murray Hotel, which was going to be way nicer than the Palace, which was where most of the hikers stayed. It was only $10 more. Um, and yeah, so I eventually made it into town in Silver Springs. It's a super nice little town with a great food co-op. So my resupply was going to be, expensive, but I would get like really good, protein bars and stuff. Um, and there's good hiking stores and post office and laundromat and hotels and restaurants, and they were all right next to each other on the same, one or two city blocks. Um, yeah, and it's good that Silver City was nice because unknown to me, I was going to end up spending quite a lot of time there over the next weeks. Foreshadowing here, a little bit of a story, because I had something go quite a bit wrong um, in the next few weeks. It turned out fine in the end. I'm going to save that for the next podcast audio recording here. So, but anyway, on that particular day, I took a zero and rested up, trying to work the details out of the last section. I only had 160 miles left for my entire CDT hike. Um, Remember that it's 3,100 miles long, that trail. I needed to figure out how I was going to get to the Crazy Cook Monument on the US-Mexico border, or how to get back from it because there's really very poor roads down there. Um, so I was able to set up a ride, kind of, for October 5th with the CDT nonprofit group, and they hadn't stocked the water caches yet for the year. So that was why I had to wait until October 5th. I think it was at that point, it was like September 28th or something. So I was basically gonna hitch a ride with this guy Danny, who was doing the first run to restock the water caches, and he was only going to charge me like 160 bucks or something instead of $550, which is what it would otherwise be, and which basically makes it a no-go. So, yeah, so I got that set up. The other problem is, because of all of the border stuff going on, with like build a wall and all that stuff, um, they had designated the Crazy Cook Monument inaccessible. And, you couldn't go there at all if you were an international person. If you were a US citizen, you weren't allowed to go there unless you had a pass from a military base. The military base was called I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, Huach, Huachuca, Huachuca military base. So I actually had to email that military base and give them like my social security number and send them a photo and tell them why I wanted the pass as a hiker, and I got sent back a pass which I had to print and laminate just so I could get access to the border. And I was the first hiker who had to do that. Some of the CDT nonprofit group members had already done it, but I was actually the first hiker to get one of these passes. So I was, explaining to other people later how to go through this process, this paper, it's kind of like a pain in the butt paperwork process. So anyways, I got all that sorted out. I thought I had a ride for October 5th. I had my pass. And so I basically had like 3 or 4 days to kill. And I could either do that in Silver City or Lordsburg. Like I could just hike down to Lordsburg and wait there. So I decided to do that. So, yeah, so I stayed one day in Silver City, resting up, and and then took off the next morning, walking the 10 miles of paved road to the trailhead. One cool thing that happened along the way was a trail angel stopped, and he was like, "Hey, I recognize you from the Gila." And I guess at the visitor center, he and his buddy had driven to the visitor center and had hiked north towards one of the hot springs, and he saw me going by on the other side of the river, and he was like, "Hey, can I help you with anything? I got um, all these caffeinated drinks," and I was like, "No, no, I can't. I can't have caffeine of any kind." Um, and he was like, "Oh, let me help you out." And he had this spray bottle, and he's like, "It feels so nice." He's like spraying himself with the spray bottle, and so he started like spraying me with a spray bottle to cool me off. He was really kind, but sort of funny. And then I was like, "Yeah, really, all I would want is just some water if you have water." So he is like, "Oh yeah, I got water." And so I took some of the water out of like a canteen he had in the back of his truck. And he was like, "Oh yeah, it's mountain water from the Gila." So it was water from the Gila. So remember that. So I ended up taking, I guess, what was unfiltered water from him. Um, I did filter that water though into my main water bag. So that was one water source. Eventually, I'm going to have problems with my water source. That's kind of like the big reveal here. I get sick. So this is potentially one place where I might have gotten some bad water. Yeah, so anyway, he took off. He didn't offer me a road, a ride, very honorable thing to do because he probably assumed that we all want to walk every last mile, even if it's a paved road, which I am trying to do on this trail. And yeah, so after the paved road, there was a dirt road, and I ran into a couple livestock water tanks and took water from both of them as well. So that water got mixed together with the water that the trail angel gave me, um, all after being filtered. And I also took some standing water from a stream bed that I assumed was rainwater because it had been raining the last couple days. And I found a really nice camping spot that night, um, right where the brown tent was marked on my guide. Had a nice little bag shower, cleaned off, had dinner, and went to sleep. So, yeah, I think this is a good place to stop, because the story of what happened the next day is going to take a long time to tell. And I'm also at the hour mark here, which is probably even a little bit too long for one of these recordings. But yeah, I hope everyone is doing good, and I'll see you in the next one.